As a pastor, I'm always aware that I have a serious advantage over most people when it comes to engaging the Bible. It's part of my actual job. But that also means since I've spent so much time in it, I've learned a lot about what's helpful and what's not. And I'm going to go through my process, what I do week after week, and give some reasons why I do that. And you can see if any of these ideas fit for you in your engagement with the Bible. Number one, study the Bible to help someone else. See, my greatest motivator is knowing I'll be teaching others. I love seeing people have that get it factor that helps them trust the Bible on a deeper level. I'm doing it publicly, and that keeps me honest and it keeps me careful. People view me as an authority, so I have a responsibility to properly handle the Bible. Now, how that applies to you is if you want to get the most out of Bible study and develop the mentality that treats it right, imagine you're preparing to share it with someone else because, sooner or later, if you hang in there, you'll get your chance, even if it's a friend at work or your own kid. So I recommend that you learn how to handle it right. Okay, so the second thing is this. Know how you learn. So the very beginning of my process, here's what I do. I pace. I pace a lot. I get in my 10,000 steps nearly every day because I like going to large open spaces and pacing back and forth while I read the passage out loud and pray over it. I read the same passage several times at the beginning of the process, but it's pace, read, pray, pace, read, pray, pace, read, pray. Now, caution.
Hold up. Wait a minute.
That doesn't mean that's what you have to do. That's why I said the point is know how you learn. And here's why I do that. One of the most freeing and helpful ideas I ever received about learning was my learning style. See, there's different lists, but there's at least 3 learning styles, they say. There's visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, which means more hands-on. I have something to do in order to learn. Now, we all learn differently. And I learned I have a much harder time sitting quietly in a chair and reading. Maybe you don't, but for me, that's a recipe for like a nice nap and not a good Bible study. So I have to be moving around. I know this about myself. There's a kind of connection between my feet moving and my brain engaging. So also, I read it out loud because I'm an auditory learner. If I hear it, I can better understand it. Now that's me. That may not be you, but the point is, if you have no problem sitting quietly and reading in a chair, go for it. If not, do what works. Listen to the Bible on audio. Watch a video that has the Bible in it. A friend of mine's life was revolutionized when he learned that there are actual movies with all 4 Gospels on it word for word. He was a very visual learner, so do what works for you. So I pace, I read out loud, and I pray, and I do that to develop a familiarity with what I'm reading, with the goal of, the next principle is becoming an expert. Now, it might sound kind of arrogant and unrealistic, but before I teach, I make it my goal to know as much about or even more than anyone in the room that I'm going to be teaching. And that also, I know it probably is never going to happen because I happen to know there's like 3 college professors in the Bible that are in my congregation, but still, I kind of make that my goal that I'm going for. I want to nearly have it memorized. I want to know the issues being addressed and the questions around it. This is why I recommend when people ask how they should start studying the Bible at all, I always say start with the shortest book, which is 3 John, but make it your goal to be an expert at 3 John. Or you can pick a single story like the prodigal son or something like that, but go through a process where you get very familiar and you understand that passage using the other points I'm going to give, like this one. Pay attention. So my favorite Bible interpretation professor in college told us the first rule of Bible interpretation is to pay attention. And to learn this, he used to make us diagram Bible sentences. Now, I don't know if diagramming sentences is even a thing anymore, and I'm assure you I will never again diagram another sentence. However, it did illustrate the importance of paying attention. But what I will do is I will whiteboard while I'm studying. Now, this keeps me focused and it keeps me pacing while I'm exploring. Now, on the whiteboard, I can color code however I want. I can draw pictures. I can connect thoughts. I can draw arrows. It all means stuff to me that it doesn't mean to anybody else, but it helps me engage with the text. Now, what kinds of things do I pay attention to and write down? I try to follow the flow of thought of the writer. Remember, context, context, context. Context is king. I'll always look before the passage that I'm studying and what comes after it to see if it's relevant, and it often is. I write down key words that are obviously the standouts of the passage. Remember, every word matters. What words seem to be the most important in the sentences? That's what I ask myself. I write down anything that stands out to me. What's interesting to me? What confuses me? What do I know I'm going to have to study later? I pray and talk to God about what's clear and what's not. I make notes of details I'm going to have to research. Now, here's another principle. Explain it in your own words. Now, what I always try to do is convert what's being said into my own terms using my own language and illustrations. I explain the passage to myself. I do this from the very start, again, as if I were going to be teaching someone else, because I will be. So when you do that, it's more than just words on a page, though. It becomes something you can almost feel moving down into deeper parts of your thinking. And then I try to put myself in the place of people from different walks of life who are listening. People who don't believe this stuff at all, people who have had very little exposure to church or the Bible, all the way up to very, very knowledgeable people. And I try to imagine myself explaining to these different groups. Now this takes my understanding to levels beyond just the surface. I typically at this stage, I find something out that I'm genuinely excited about or moved by. You see, I don't think I can move anyone with a passage until I've been moved by that passage. And if I can't explain it to me, I'm pretty sure I can't explain it to anybody else. So at that point, after I do all that and really download all that, I would say, get help. Now, only after I've done that part of becoming familiar am I ready to start using other resources. I think that order is important. I want to know what the issues are and the key ideas are, so I will know what kind of help I'm really actually needing. For instance, you'll understand commentaries more if you read them already knowing what the passage essentially is, and that's what I'm always going for. And getting help, it's crucial for lots and lots of reasons. First, when you get help, you're acknowledging your own blind spots. You're assuming you have them, because you do. And as hard as you try to get my own stuff and really understand it on my own, I know that I'm not going to see everything. My job is to be a learner, especially if I'm a teacher. So it's also important to remember the Bible's for the church, the whole faith community. And through the centuries, a lot of great things have been written down. And you're crazy and maybe a little arrogant if you don't tap into that.
Boom. Roasted.
Now, getting help, it also keeps you from running down some weird novel interpretation track. You'll have unique insights because you're unique. But if your interpretation is off from anyone you've seen, you may want to pause and be open to the idea that you may not be getting insight. You're just seeing stuff that isn't there. Now, I'm big on the definition of words, and it's always a good idea to check out the original language, especially for those words that I know are important because I familiarize myself with the passage. I write down the words I want to look up. Now, I'll look up words in a Greek dictionary. Now, there's small ones online that you can use, and there's this big, ugly one that I use that happens to be dull as dirt, but it can be helpful. I just have to be very, very patient with it. I will give you a confession here. I skipped over language studies in college because I had friends that complained so much how hard Greek was to learn that I just flat out chickened out. And that was a bad call. I always regretted it. But thankfully, there's lots of resources out there to take advantage of. So I do that. And then the last step is I read commentaries. And if it's a particularly difficult passage, I'll listen to other preachers teach on it. YouTube is particularly awesome for that, by the way. Also, here's another thing. If it's about some more historical events or kind of tactile things, say like the tabernacle or the temple, I take advantage of resources on YouTube because there's animations, there's Holy Land tours, there's even a guy that does like a scale model studies of the tabernacle and what the priests did. Take advantage of the things that people are offering. Now, something else I'll occasionally do, depending on the passage, is to go deep with metaphors. Now, a lot of Bible passages contain metaphors or illustrations. Now, for example, the Bible talks a lot about sheep. And it uses them as a metaphor for us. So once I met someone in our church that had sheep, and I went out and let her tell me all about them. It was super interesting, and it shed a lot of light on why Jesus calls us sheep. Listen, you don't have to know a farmer. You don't have to know a shepherd. I promise you can find a shepherd or a farmer on YouTube who will tell you things about sheep. Study those actual metaphors. I learned a ton when I watched people talk about pruning grapevines because Jesus used grapevines as a metaphor. So take that in and explore those things. In other words, be creative and explore. The Bible is the most vivid and rich literature there is in the world. Not to mention it's the Word of God. So treat it that way. It actually can be fun. I've had years, starting with college, to build up a library here and also even more digitally. Most pastors have that. So what if you don't have these kinds of resources? There's a very simple answer to that I address in this video where I give the top 3 resources and I answer a bonus question. So I hope that helps. See you next time.